I'm a bushcraft instructor and an ethnobotanist. Basically, an ethnobotanist is someone that studies the relationships between people and plants.
Yeah.
So it can be anything from agriculture, looking at how you can perhaps increase the yield of crops, not just for here but in developing countries. A lot of the time you go in and you may consult, say, a local culture, how to perhaps get the most out of their local plants, things like that. But then it goes all the way through to going out into very popular places, the Amazon,
Right.
to go looking for new novel compounds, for new medicines, new drugs. And the role of the ethnobotanist is basically he's the first point of contact with the sort of tribal people. So
Right.
you go into the forest,
Yes.
find the tribe, hopefully get a rapport going, get
Yeah.
a bit of a relationship, then hopefully you're accepted into the tribe, and then they show you, their plants that they use for food, for clothing, for shelter, for medicine.
Yeah.
And the idea is to hopefully, of course, if you do discover something, if an indigenous culture do provide something, which has happened many times.
Yeah.
There's many examples of lots of drugs that have come from these places. The important thing is we're trying to sort of get away from this image perhaps that in the Victorian era where these great white scientists would go out and basically pillage
Yes,
these places.
yes.
Now, a very important thing is if you do get some useful knowledge from these cultures, you set up all the systems that you need so that they're catered for, so that they get money, if they want money. A lot of these places they don't,
Yeah.
but they usually want medicine, so
Yes.
you make it so it's fair, because it's got to be fair.
Yeah.
And these people are the caretakers of this vast knowledge,
Yes.
and they need to be compensated if we take some from them. So that's kind of what an ethnobotanist does. It's a bit vague.
Well, no, it's very exciting. So,
That's the general thing.
have you been out to any other cultures and,
I've
and
been
found any of this?
not as yet. I've been stuck in England, mostly digging up bracken, which is really, really fascinating. But I've found out a few things, and actually I'll talk to you a bit about bracken later on when we come across some, and I'll tell you what I've found.
Yeah. Can you share with us some of the wealth of knowledge of this country?
Yeah.
And also my question would be, has most of that knowledge been lost, or is there still a way of coming back to it and finding it again?
Well, to be honest, I've found that this knowledge has only been lost over the course of about the last 1 or 2 generations.
Right.
Some of the old timers that I've spoken to, they said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I've said about bushcraft, and they said, "Well, what's that?" And I've explained. They've looked at me and sort of said, "Well, that's just living where I come from."
Yeah.
But with technology and science and the way things have gone, yes, it has been lost. But fortunately, there's been a great resurgence in the interest in it, and now a lot of people are getting back on board, and there is I'm here talking to you about it because there's an increased interest, and it's coming back. It's not going to be lost. I don't think we have to worry about that.
Okay. That's good.
It might have been a bit shaky there for a while, but
Yeah.
no, there's the interest, and
There's enough people working with it
there
now.
is, and we're surrounded by so many interesting things, and hopefully I can show you 1 or 2 of them. Obviously there's thousands, but hopefully we'll be able to find something interesting and get a few more people interested in this.
Yeah. So then perhaps as we walk you can point out to us some of the more interesting things that we should know about our own land
Definitely.
and culture.
Yeah, well, this is the birch tree. This is probably one of our most common trees, and I'm sure most people are probably familiar with the white peely bark that you find on it. The good thing with this bark is it peels off the tree very, very easily, and it contains a lot of natural oils, and these oils are very useful because they catch fire very easily.
Right.
And if you find yourself stuck out in the woods, this makes an incredible tinder that burns with a very bright flame and burns very hot and will enable you to get a fire going should you need it.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's absolutely great for that. You can also peel it off in great sheets and
Yeah.
fold it
Yeah.
and make a torch.
Wow.
So you can walk along and light your way through.
And have people been using that for hundreds of thousands
Millennia.
of years?
Yeah, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Before history, way before history.
So even if the birch is, I mean, this one's got moss on it,
Yep.
so I wouldn't have assumed it was particularly dry.
Doesn't
Will
matter.
that still catch?
Yep. The oils in it will catch.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than that. Slightly earlier in the year, around the beginning of spring, just as the sap starts to rise, you can actually put a tap in,
Yeah.
and you can take some sap, which you can boil down like a maple syrup, but it's a birch syrup,
Yeah.
or you can just drink it straight, and it's very healthy. And they've actually found that one of the chemicals in it that they've called Bet-A, the bet comes from Betula pendula, which is the scientific name. Bet-A is now being used to treat all sorts of cancers.
Oh wow, really?
Very effectively.
Yeah.
It's they're very excited about what's coming from this.
So when they use that, do they doctor it in any way, or do they?
Yeah,
do they
they extract the pure Bet-A
Yeah.
that they've identified as the active chemical,
Yeah.
and that goes through a lot of chemical industrial processes, I would imagine.
But that's being used in our country.
Yes, it's only just being.
Yeah.
This is new knowledge,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of potential for it. But it doesn't stop there. The leaves. If you find yourself stuck out, you need a little bit of water with them. But if you crush these up with water, they contain a lot of a chemical called saponin,
Right.
which is soap.
Yeah.
So this is your soap, or one of them. There's many
Yeah.
plants that can do it, but it's fantastic. It's antibacterial, and it'll clean you up. Obviously it has a natural perfume, shall we say, which is just sort of green. But yeah, that'll keep you going, keep infections, keep you from getting skin infections, things like that. It's just a fantastic tree.
And you can just drink, obviously, if you were to tap it, but you could drink the sap
Straight.
quite safely.
Quite safely.
Yeah.
Yep. Any water that you get out of a tree like this is absolutely pure. It's been filtered as the water comes in, and it has to go through the different fibres. It's filtered and completely pure.
That sounds amazing. I had no idea.
But you have to remember, if you are going to tap it, to put a plug in and stop it, because you're basically bleeding the tree, and you don't want it to bleed to death. So you take your bit, you seal it up.
And that's
And
best
go
to
away.
do in spring when it's rising.
In spring, yeah, around sort of the end of April, May. A good sort of little tip is if you look for the buds on the hazel trees,
Yes.
when they're just budding in the spring, that's the time to go collect sap.
So Richard, what are we looking at here?
Well, this is Scots Pine, and this is another very common tree. A lot of people who know about pine resin, if you've been into the woods as a child and climbed one of these, you'll probably be acquainted with the sticky sap that comes from it. Well, that sap is also antibacterial. So if you're, say, wanting to make a cutting board, a spoon, something like that, it's going to have natural antibacterial qualities.
Oh wow.
So as you cut meat on it, it'll kill the bacteria,
Yeah.
which is quite handy.
Yes.
The pine resin as well, it can be used to put on wounds, to stop them going septic and to heal them.
Yeah.
The needles have got another great use, and this applies for all species of pine. It's called woodsman's tea, and you just pick off some pine needles,
Yeah.
boil it up in some water,
Yeah.
and drink it. It's incredibly high in vitamin C,
Right.
one of the highest concentrations of vitamin C known, and it has a nice fresh pine taste.
Yeah.
And it's just something that you can pick off a tree, put in the pot,
Yeah.
and away you go, and it lifts your mood.
Wow, that's fabulous. Does it have any? Is it antibacterial as well?
Yes.
I mean, it's
Yep.
Lots of other
Yep, all
properties.
parts are antibacterial.
Yeah.
And also the resins and things, if you're I don't necessarily advise it. There are better ways of making fire, but if you're really stuck and resorting to rubbing sticks together and
Yeah.
doing a bow drill, it's a good one for that. The oils and the resins really help it to catch fire more. It's a bit easier.
So are there now in this country, are we getting more managed areas of these trees that people are beginning to use with those practical uses, for example like chopping boards, etc.?
It seems to be relatively untapped at the moment. Of course, everywhere you go in the British Isles, it's been managed.
Yeah.
There are no natural environments left in the British Isles.
Mm.
We've been here Actually, I saw a programme recently, they found some remains that are 500,000 years old.
Wow.
So people have been in this land for 500,000 years, and it's
Yeah.
only a very small island, and so they've adapted it, they've changed it to suit their own needs. You've heard of England being a green and pleasant land, and it is, it's a very easy place to survive. And part of the reason why we came up as a sort of a dominant country throughout history is because of the ease at which we can survive in our own environment.
Yes, and that's still true, but in a different way, because we need to get perhaps back in touch with these natural resources that make it so easy for us to live here.
I think so. It's, again, I certainly support people going out and gathering and harvesting their own material. It's a much greener way of doing things.
How can that be done by members of the public in a sustainable way?
Yes, it's difficult, I'm not going to lie. You have to have permission. You have to go and speak to people and get your permission. Fortunately, where we are here, as I live here, I have commoners' rights, and I'm allowed to gather anything.
Right.
I can take a tree. If I want to take a tree, I can take a tree. And I do in the winter to keep my fire going.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I'm lucky in that respect that I get to live like that, and it is hard for other people. But I think the more people get into it, and the more people just go and ask.
Yeah.
Just go and ask landowners.
Yeah.
A lot of them are going to be fine with that.
Yeah.
A lot of them actually want some trees and things taking out.
Yes.
So no, I urge people to go and ask landowners if they'll let them on the land, and most of the time you're going to find that they'll be accepted, and that's no problem. Well, this is a very common tree in the British countryside. A lot of people will be very familiar with it. This is the hazel tree, Corylus avellana, and you know, a lot of people, they have the hazelnuts in chocolate and in all sorts of things. So it's quite a big business. But this time of year, as you can see here, just got some hazelnuts starting to appear now. The problem when you're trying to collect food in the wild is you have to race the squirrels for those, because they'll have them as soon as they're good.
They're very popular.
Yeah. Seeing as I can buy them from the shop, I tend to leave them for the squirrels. But not only the obvious hazelnuts, but the wood hazel is such a useful species. Actually, in a lot of places you'll see old hazel coppices, and we've been using hazel since the Stone Age, to be honest, for building houses, setting up fences, all manner of things, fishing, you can make rods out of it. It's a really versatile and incredibly useful and important plant in our countryside. So this is a very common species. There's a lot of variants on this species, but this is willow. Specifically, this is goat willow, Salix caprea. But one of the characteristics of the willow family, and where the prefix salix comes in, is the salicylic acid that is found in the leaves, and also just under the leather and bark in the shoots. Salicylic acid.
Sorry, in the green shoots.
In the green shoots,
Yeah.
just underneath. And what I'm actually going to give me. You won't thank me for it, but you'll get the experience. Because if you just chew on that.
Lovely.
And salicylic acid is basically aspirin, and this is where aspirin was first derived from. And all you need to do is, if you've got a bit of a headache, just walk past and just chew.
That is amazing.
And doesn't it taste like an aspirin? It's got
I've
that
not had
very
aspirin
bitter.
for many years, but yeah.
It's got that very, very, very bitter, and that applies for all species of willow. They all contain salicylic acid.
Oh wow.
And this was the very first painkiller. And they're pretty certain it's been used since the Paleolithic.
Yeah.
And eventually, this is originally where aspirin came from, but now they've synthesised it, because this can be a little bit harsh on the stomach.
Right. Yeah.
And they've sort of synthesised that out now, so it's something to bear in mind. Not so good on a completely empty stomach.
Yeah. What a great healer.
Yep, fantastic. So, you could probably tell me what this is.
A thistle.
It's a thistle. And
I'm glad I got that.
now, a lot of people will immediately dismiss this as any form of nutrition or anything, because of the vast array of defences it has. But what you need to get into sort of a way of thinking about the environment and about nature. And if something is going to this length to defend itself, it's defending something.
Yes.
And these are incredibly edible. You need to be very careful and use a knife, but you can chop them off, shave off the spikes, and essentially you're left with celery.
Oh, right.
It contains a huge amount of water. It's almost like getting a drink. So if you're thirsty, if you've got a real dry mouth, even if you're just out on a long walk, it doesn't have to be a survival situation.
Yes.
To be honest, if you get yourself into a survival situation in this country, don't come crying to me, because you really shouldn't do.
Yes.
But if you're out on your walk and you're thirsty, you can just trim those down, and it's really, I don't like celery, but I love thistle.
And
it's really fantastic.
is that what they call milk thistle, or is that something different?
No, this isn't milk thistle. The milk thistle tends to be a slightly shorter, different one. But all thistles will do it, but it's only at this time of year when they grow very tall.
Right.
You see them normally. You can eat the leaves still,
Yeah.
put them in a salad, obviously take the spikes off.
Yes.
But at this time of year, just strip it off and eat it raw, and it's great.
I do feel like David Bellamy right at this moment.
Jumping through the undergrowth.
Right, well earlier I was telling you that I've been sort of stuck digging up bracken, and this is the stuff. A lot of people think it's a nuisance and a pest,
Right.
and a lot of money is actually spent removing the stuff, and I can't defend it that much. It is a pretty nasty plant. It's highly carcinogenic, but what I've discovered throughout my thesis, and there was a big gap. I didn't know what their staple was through the winter,
Yeah.
and how they survived getting starch and carbohydrate through the winter. Because a lot of people, when you talk about survival, they think, oh, I'll go out and I'll kill a rabbit, I'll kill an animal. There's no need. There's absolutely no need to kill animals. You need carbohydrate to be able to digest protein.
Right.
If you have no carbohydrate, you can't digest protein.
Yeah.
And you can live on carbohydrate and other minerals for a very, very, very long time before you need to worry about protein. You get a lot of people chasing rabbits and burning off lots and lots of energy.
Yeah.
There's no need. All you need is a bit of plant knowledge, basically. Which brings back to the bracken. The rhizomes, which are an underground stem at the bottom, at the moment it's being filled up with starch. Photosynthesis obviously occurs, and bracken then stores starch down in its roots, and it goes in a cycle. Towards the end of the summer, it puts down all the starch, and it uses that as a store for the next spring to fuel its growth. Because as you can see, it's an aggressive plant. It grows very tall and very quickly, and it needs a lot of energy, and that it gains from its rhizomes. But no one knew how to get it out, or if it could be got out, or if there was enough. But I managed to show, and I managed to prove, that if you harvest it sort of at the end of September, October, you can then also harvest it throughout the winter.
Yes.
The rhizomes, you have to prepare them as well to get out the nasty chemicals. It's not a completely straightforward process. But as long as you process the rhizomes properly, you can get actually quite a vast amount of food. And this was the area that my study was in. And this field just to the side of us, this little area here, I managed to work out that there's enough bracken in there to keep a family of 6 going for 16 years.
Oh wow, really?
Taking care of all their carbohydrate needs.
Yeah.
So it's a vast resource, and happily I was managed to prove that our British ancestors, this is why we're still inhabited, why these islands have been inhabited for 500,000 years, is greatly due to bracken and the amazing amount of food that it can supply if you know how to gather it and how to prepare it.
So what would you have to do with it?
Okay, so to prepare bracken, and this is your exclusive, because as yet, my findings have only been published in one place, and so this isn't common knowledge yet.
Yeah.
But when you're harvesting bracken, the first thing to look for is the colour, and if it's green, it's no good.
Right.
Too early.
Uh-huh.
As you can see, we're here too early.
Yes.
But as I said, sort of the end of September, October, when it's gone golden brown, as you can see, a few of these are starting to. When they've gone golden brown, that's when all the photosynthesis has been done and the rhizomes are at their maximum.
Yeah.
Then you need to dig them up, and you'll find that they put out these rhizomes to sort of 2 foot depth everywhere.
Right.
And you'll find a mass of them. You actually want the deeper rhizomes, that they put some out a little shallower and they're a lot thinner. But if you keep digging down, you get to the big juicy ones.
Yeah.
You dig those up, and then what you want to do is leave them to dry as long as you can. If you're in a survival situation, you can eat it straight out of the ground. Mm-hmm. It won't hurt you, like smoking one cigarette won't hurt you. Mm-hmm. But if you do it a lot, then you're going to start getting problems.
Right.
But to avoid any problems, gather it when it's golden brown, dry the rhizomes out as long as you can, then rehydrate them, if possible, in flowing water for 3 days. The flowing water, as it reabsorbs into the plant, it leaches out and it washes away the vast majority of the nasty chemicals. When you've done that, you then want to dry it again. It took a while to work all this out.
I was going to ask, how did you find this out?
It took a while. Then you want to dry it out again. And then when you've dried it out again, you want to skin it because it has a very hard woody outer shell. You need to take that off using a knife, or you can beat it. And then you're left with these inner fibres that are surrounded and coated with starch. You then want to beat them, basically. As you see still to this day, people in Africa beating the grain. It's the same sort of principle. You want to beat it, and then you end up with a flour. And then you do with that flour what you will.
Yes.
You can just make it into a cake, you can add other things into it. You can either mix it up with water to make a dough, or a lot of people in the old days apparently would use animal fat. Right. And there's reports from New Zealand and Canada that the Maoris and the Canadians used to use it, but this is where I sort of came in, because everyone had forgotten how to.
Yeah.
They knew that it was used, but no one could work out how.
Yeah.
So this is how. And mix it up with animal fat or just water, and you get a substantial meal from something that's otherwise considered a pest.
Yes. And I can see now that there really is
It's
a lot
everywhere.
of food here.
It's absolutely everywhere, and it would be nice if we could actually come up with a modern day use for the stuff. But I fear the nasty chemicals will perhaps put people off that. But it can be made safe.
How long does the initial drying process take?
You can do it all in a week.
Yeah.
You can do it all in a week.
Yeah.
From dry it out, rehydrate it, dry it out again. You can just about get it done in a week. But like I say, if you're desperate, you can dig it out of the ground and you can just throw the rhizome on a fire and roast it.
Yeah.
And eat it like a carrot or something like that. But if you want to be safe about it, which I thoroughly advise, I really don't advise eating it raw. I can't really stress that enough.
Yeah.
Even though it won't hurt just once, don't do it. But you prepare it properly, and there's no reason why you can't enjoy this stuff.
So, at what period in British history do you think this was being used as food, and when would that have stopped?
It was used, they think, up until about the 17th century in Britain.
Really?
There were even sort of laws and rights regarding who could gather the bracken and who couldn't.
Yes.
And that says to me that it was important.
Yes.
That seems to be completely arbitrary unless it was an important thing.
Yes.
So they think it was used up until the 17th century. I was able to show it was definitely used during, at least we know, the Mesolithic.
Yeah.
And through the Neolithic.
So that's what I would more associate with it, that the 17th century seems incredibly recent.
Yes. Yeah, it really does. But we only have to look. Really, the world has completely changed in the last 50 years.
Yes.
You know, say 100 years ago, they had a lot more in common with the Mesolithic than we do now.
Right. Yes.
They were living a lot closer. It's just technology and science that have sort of taken us away from nature. Yeah. And like you're saying, I think it's very important to get back to it. But it's not only just been used for food. You can also use it as dye. You can get a yellow dye from the roots.
Yes.
And it's been used for soap, apparently, in France. So there are
Which
other
parts
uses.
are used for soap?
I believe that was also the rhizomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And does it have any healing properties?
I wouldn't have thought so.
No.
Just because of the massive list of nasty chemicals in it. But there's been very little research done in Bracken. Very, very little. And if I was to hear in 5-10 years' time that they'd found something incredible from this, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Because a lot of the time, a poison, the difference between a medicine and a poison is dose.
Right, yeah.
That's the definition. And there are so many incredible poisons in this plant that there must be a use somewhere.
So actually it's incredibly potent.
Oh, it's incredibly potent.
Yeah.
Very, very potent. And as you can see, it puts these toxins into the ground, and that's why you only get bracken where you get bracken.
Right.
Because it kills everything else and doesn't allow it to grow. So, very potent. I definitely think it's a candidate for further medical investigation, certainly. Okay, so this one is Rowan. It's related to ash, and you can tell that from these compound leaves that are also very similar to ash.
Right.
Where Rowan differs is it produces these berries. And these aren't quite right, but they're not far off. And these can be made into a jam or a preserve.
Yes.
They can also be made into a wash that's very good for basically feminine issues, cystitis, things like that. It's absolutely fantastic for that, and a really good, healthy thing. They taste pretty foul though.
When are they ready usually? September? Oh, thanks.
right about now. When they're red, they're ready. So around there. They're very bitter.
Yeah.
Very, very bitter.
Very bitter.
You need to put in a lot of sugar.
Yeah, make the jam.
And boil them up.
Yeah.
But when you get that incredibly bitter taste, usually that's medicine.
Yes, yeah. It usually means it's doing something good.
Yeah.
So how much of our medicine is derived from plants?
Well, even today, we're standing here in 2012, and over a third of all our modern medicines are derived directly from plants. And unfortunately, they seem to be putting in less effort into researching plants as opposed to coming up with things in a lab. But it's a huge resource, and they're discovering new species every day, and it's still vitally important that people do still look around and try and discover plants and look for new uses. Because with over a third of all our medicines, if you take that third away, we're in trouble. Well, here we just have the humble dandelion that I'm sure everyone that has a garden is familiar with. And people probably don't necessarily put the dandelions together with food, but of course there's dandelion and burdock, which is a very sort of old-fashioned drink. But
very nice.
Yeah, it's still very nice. You can eat the leaves just as they are. They're quite bitter because they contain a latex, a sap, which as a child you're probably told is poisonous, but it's not. It's a bit bitter, but it's also a diuretic.
Yes.
And it can be used for purposes like that. The roots are also edible, and you can actually dry them out and grind them up, and it makes a passable coffee substitute.
Oh yes, I've heard of that, and I've heard also that as a diuretic it's very cleansing.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. You'll find it'll make you sweat, and it'll make you urinate more.
Yeah.
But that's what a diuretic is, eh? Well, this is a very famous plant that I'm sure most people have heard of. This is St John's wort,
Yes.
and it's got a very big industry behind it, this particular plant.
I've heard of it in the treatment of depression.
That's right. Apparently it's very, very effective
Yeah.
in the treatment of depression, and it also lacks some of the side effects that things such as Prozac or other
Yeah.
completely synthetic drugs can give you. So it is, it's a fantastic plant, and it comes, the actual Hyacinth is the chemical, and it's actually found in the leaves.
Yeah.
And if you hold them up to the light, can you see those tiny little windows?
Yes.
That is what contains the Hyacinth.
Right.
It's in those little windows there.
Oh, wow. So what is it?
It is a chemical that they have found to have antidepressant properties.
Yeah.
But they've been using it for a very long time, St John's wort. And you can, if you want to gather it yourself, it's quite safe. And you can, don't go overboard, but you could perhaps stick that in a tea,
Yeah.
and it makes quite a pleasant tea.
Yeah.
And it's also quite an uplifting tea, even if you're not depressed.
Yeah,
It's quite a nice uplifting tonic, really.
Just going to ask that. So other than being an antidepressant, it's also quite stimulating, uplifting.
Definitely.
Does it have any other properties?
At the moment, not that I'm aware of. One thing, though, it looks very similar to ragwort
Right.
and Oxford ragwort, which is poisonous.
Right.
So
How do you tell the difference?
it's in the leaves.
Right.
It's taking those leaves, holding it up to the light,
Yes.
and looking for those little pinpricks
Yes.
in the leaf. But with all of these things that I've shown you today, I wouldn't recommend anybody going out and just doing it for themselves without first coming and finding an expert and going on a course, even if it's
Yeah.
just an afternoon little walk like we're doing here, because you have to see it with your own eyes to really be able to identify,
Yes.
and that doesn't necessarily come across through forms of media. Well, this is another very common one and an interesting one. This one's called Silverweed,
Silverweed. Yeah.
and you can tell that you've got the top side, but then the underside has got this silver sheen to it, and often you'll see great runs of the stuff, and you'll see like a big silver walkway. Now this was used, the rhizomes, and so the rhizomes are an underground stem, and they contain a small amount of starch, but they can be gathered in sufficient quantities to make a meagre meal, but still a meal, and really it was vital to many Irish people's survival during the awful things that happened there. But another use that is recorded is actually by Pliny the Elder,
Yeah.
and the Romans first discovered this when they came to England, and they put it in their sandals, and it would soothe their feet on long marches.
Oh, right.
And since then they've looked into it, and it's actually slightly radioactive,
Really?
and nobody knows why.
Yeah.
It's not dangerously radioactive at all, but it's radioactive,
Yeah.
and
so-
they think that might have something to do with these healing properties.
Yeah.
It's a strange one.
And what kind of environment would you be likely to find these in?
This is grassland, really. Verges on roadsides, on the downs, like that we have down here in Sussex, up on the downland. Any grassland, really. It's very common, very, very common. This one here is interesting. Actually, fortunately, it's right near another one. Okay, you tell me, what do you recognise this?
The only thing I can imagine is that they might be dock leaves.
That's right.
Oh, good.
Yeah, these are dock leaves. Now, a lot of people say that these have these medicinal properties and they cure nettle stings.
Yes.
I'm sorry to break it to you, but
Oh,
they
no,
don't.
don't say that.
There's no evidence at all that these do anything
Right.
for nettle stings.
Nothing at all.
But they're edible,
Right.
so you can eat them. You can cook them up, or you can eat them raw. You can also use them. Do you remember when we were talking about the bracken, and you can make it into like a cake or like a dough?
Yeah.
Well, you can then wrap that in dock leaves
Yeah.
and throw it on a fire,
Yeah.
and it'll cook without burning it. So they're very useful for wrapping food if you're just going to throw it on a fire.
And are they the dock leaves that are in Burdock? Is that Dandelion
No,
Burdock?
no, that's different. Burdock is a much larger plant.
Right.
These are just common dock leaves.
Yeah.
This plant does stop stinging nettles from stinging.
Right, and it actually looks quite like a stinging
And it looks
nettle,
like a stinging
doesn't
nettle.
it? Yeah, I think I've seen them growing near stinging nettles.
Well, this is called hedge woundwort.
Right.
And the woundwort comes in because it also helps stop bleeding
Yeah.
and helps heal cuts. But it also stops nettles from stinging.
Yes.
There's a drawback. If you take that, crush it up and give that a good sniff and tell me what you think it smells like.
Oh, it's very strong. Actually, to me, it smells a bit like washing up liquid.
Most people think it smells like cat urine,
Maybe it's because I haven't got a cat.
but it's disgusting, if you ask me. It's absolutely horrible. And that's what you're going to smell like, but you won't be stinging.
Yes, yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
think the leaves, they look so much like nettles, and they're textured very much like nettles, aren't they? Very similar.
But your identifying feature is the flowers.
Flower, yeah.
Nettles flowers are little round things that hang down, and they certainly don't have that colour.
Yeah.
So it's one to remember,
Yeah.
and the good way to identify it is its smell.
Right.
But this is yew, and again this is got a lot of sort of legend and a lot of history associated with it. Obviously it makes the best wood for longbows,
Yes.
and the French found that out much to their dismay. But later on in the year, it's important that you get this right, but they have these little red berries. They're not actually berries, they're called arils technically, but they look like red berries. And they're actually edible. They're a very, very sweet, very sugary berry, but it's vitally important that you don't eat the seed. The seeds are very high concentrations of cyanide, and you can count on one hand how many it would take to kill you. And the rest of the plant is the same. It is the most poisonous plant in the British Isles. And
So the
it
leaves
needs
and
to be
the-
respected.
And the shoots, everything.
Leaves, shoots, roots, seeds, the lot.
Even the bark.
The bark, every part of it,
Yeah.
except the red fleshy fruit,
Yeah.
is deadly poisonous.
Wow.
But like I was saying earlier, a lot of the time poisons, it's to do with dose.
Yeah.
And we've actually found now it's a slightly different species. It's the Pacific yew.
Mm-hmm.
This is Taxus baccata, but specifically at the moment Taxus brevifolia, which is, like I say, the Pacific yew. They've now derived a very powerful anti-cancer agent called Taxol,
Yeah.
and it's widely used and to great effect now.
Yeah.
And it's from here. It's from the Taxus.
Absolutely. I think that this will be discovered to have many potent healing properties in the future.
No, definitely. Where there's poison, there's usually something else too.
Yeah.
And it's usually a good indicator if there's more to know.
Yeah.
It's just knowing the right things, because obviously you can't mess around. You can't mess around with things like this.
Yeah.
And I often wonder, I'm telling you all these edible and medicinal plants, but you have to sort of spare a thought for our numerous ancestors that died working this out.
Yeah.
Because there's only one way to work it out, and someone has to try it. And you wonder what our knowledge, how many lives that's based on, and of course we'll never know. But it's safe to assume that many, many people died, just so that we could have the knowledge that we have do today. And I think that's another reason why it's just nice to keep hold of that knowledge. Obviously, it was a very long time ago, but the more you live in nature and the more that you walk around, the more that you learn about it, the closer you feel to our ancestors. The more I do bushcraft and the more I do ethnobotany, the more I feel a kinship with them, and you get into their mindset, and you feel that you understand, and you understand the land, and you realise it's all one system.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just this, that and the other. Everything needs everything else so that it can work. And once you've worked out that, then you really do have some power, and you've got some knowledge. Because they're really tasty to birds.
Right, yeah.
And they just pass through the system with birds. So that's the one part that the yew decided to make it,
Oh, yeah.
so it could continue itself.
No?
Oh.
It does taste good. It's the best tasting food you've given me all day.
So the family that ethnobotanists are very interested in, because they're the most recent family of plants to evolve.
Oh, really?
They are the newest on the planet.
Yeah.
And along with that, they tend to have more complex chemicals within them.
Right.
They've had longer to evolve and longer to come up with solutions
Yeah.
to herbivory and things like that. And so a lot of the time when you're looking at medicinal plants like Echinacea, it's the Asteraceae family that it comes from.
And they have probably grown with some kind of adaptation to our present needs.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. Have we come at the time of year where there's literally like no flowers and no berries
Yeah, yeah. You've come
in between?
at a real bad time actually, but I'm doing my best.
You're doing incredibly well.
Spring and autumn, brilliant. Summer, terrible.
Right.
Anyway, this is another common plant of our countryside and our hedgerows. This is elder.
Yeah.
The people are probably quite familiar with elderflower. It's quite popular app, an elderflower cordial.
Yes, I was drinking it last night.
Oh, there you go. Elderberry wine
Yeah.
is another one. But actually the medicinal properties of this go on for miles, and to be honest there's too much to get into here. But there's whole books dedicated to elder.
Right.
It used to be considered as a one-stop pharmacy.
Mhm.
Parts of this plant can be used to treat almost anything you can think of,
Really?
whether it's the flowers, the berries, the bark, the roots, the leaves. There's a use for all of it,
Yeah.
and it's all excellent. But what's perhaps appropriate today, because there's a lot of insects, is its use as an insect repellent. And all you have to do is you just crush the leaves up and rub it,
Yeah.
and the juice from the leaves, you do get green,
Yes.
but you know,
Green man and all that.
that's right. And if you rub that all over, and if you smell it, it's not very nice.
It's just like cut grass. Really.
Kind of like cut grass, but the insects really don't like it,
Really?
especially mosquitoes.
Yeah.
And so it's a real handy one.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
But like I said, the other uses of it go on to the horizon. And
I've
if
heard
anyone's
of-
interested, then I'm sure it won't be too hard for them to find out more about elder.
So, Richard, if the spring and the autumn are the real wild food seasons, what did people eat in the summer?
Well, they made do with what they could find, but a lot of it is to do with storage
Yeah.
and knowing what plants to gather at what time and how to prepare them so that they will store and keep. And that was a vital skill that our ancestors mastered. Sometimes they'd dig a pit and they'd store things in a pit. Other times it may be wrapped in cloth, or sometimes even using sphagnum moss. That's got a lot of excellent properties. And they would basically dry things. A lot of it would be dried.
Right.
Of course, we think these days that you can salt things, but salt would, that was almost unheard of,
Yeah.
especially this far away from the sea.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was to do with drying,
Yeah.
processing it when you get it, drying it, and then taking it with you. And you know, these things are still, if they dried food, packet food, it's the same principle. For bacteria to grow, you need water, and so if you can take the water out of the equation,
Yeah.
it's going to stay fresh. And
Okay.
it's the same principle we have today with dehydrated food,
Yeah.
you know, packet noodles and things. When something's dry, it will keep for a very long time,
Yeah.
and it would be that would sustain them through.
Yeah.
But again, in the spring and in the winter, there are still animals to hunt,
Yeah.
and their diet would have then depended more on meat.
Yeah.
But again, you still need a certain amount of minerals and a certain amount of nutrients that can't just be found in meat. And they'd have made do. I know that at the beginning of spring they were probably quite desperate. It would have been very hard,
Yes.
and I can't claim to imagine that they'd have all survived every winter.
Yeah.
They had a very tough life.
Yeah.
When people talk about survival, it's survival.
Yeah.
It's not going out for a jolly in the countryside. It's survival, and it's harsh. But fortunately, we're the ape that grew the big brain, and so we've been able to adapt and work things out and overcome.
Yeah.
And through a manner of through skills and through knowledge of the natural world, it's why we're still here. Otherwise, we'd have died out back then.
Perhaps that's why spring was celebrated so fervently.
Definitely, because suddenly there's food again.
Yes.
Suddenly the sun's back.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're not worried that you're going to die of hypothermia that night. You've got minerals. I imagine scurvy must have been quite an issue. Of course, not that they'd know what was going on.
Yeah.
But yes, I think you hit the nail on the head, the springtime. And again, I feel there'd have also been celebrations in the autumn when there really is. We still have it as Harvest Festival
Yes.
to us,
Yes.
and it's harvest time. And
Things abundant.
and that it would have been the same back then, and I'm sure you'd have found like the dance of the Burdock or the walk of the Bracken, or there'd have been, I'm sure, these ceremonies and things attached. But sadly, our culture didn't record things. In Egypt, things were written on stone. In Mesopotamia, into clay tablets. Here, it got lost, and sadly, we will never know what they did. We can only look to other cultures that still exist as hunter-gatherers today, the Aborigines, the tribes of the Amazon, and we look to those cultures and those people to try and learn more about where we come from and what our past is, and ultimately what the future holds for us.